It happened on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been simple. I had just finished mowing the lawn, sweat soaking through my shirt, when I heard my son's voice carrying across the driveway. He was with a couple of his friends, boys I'd seen in and out of our house since middle school, now taller, deeper voices, driving cars that still smelled like dealer plastic. I wasn't paying much attention until I caught my own name in the conversation. "Yeah, my dad's kind of a failure," he said, almost laughing. The word hit me harder than any punch I'd ever taken. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Failure? From my own kid? I slowed down, my hands tightening on the mower handle, the vibration rattling through my arms as my stomach turned. His friends didn't laugh. One of them shifted uncomfortably, the other let out a weak chuckle, the kind you give when you don't know what else to do. My son, my boy I had raised with late nights, long shifts, and quiet sacrifices, stood there with his baseball cap backwards, smirking like it was just some harmless joke. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The words felt lodged in my throat. So I killed the mower, wheeled it into the shed, and went inside. My wife was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. She looked up and saw my face. "What's wrong?" I just shook my head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. That word, failure, followed me all week like a shadow I couldn't shake. At work, while I sorted through paperwork and fixed busted equipment, it lingered in my ears. Driving home, passing the same cracked sidewalks and faded billboards, it was there. Even at night, lying in bed next to my wife, staring at the ceiling fan, I kept hearing it. Failure. The thing is, he wasn't entirely wrong. Not in the way he meant it, but in the way I'd quietly believed it myself for years. I wasn't the dad who could buy him a brand new truck at 16 like some of his teammates had. I wasn't the one with the fancy job title or the perfect suits. I was the dad who wore work boots until the soles split, who drove a dented pickup that rattled over every pothole, who said, "Maybe next time," more than I ever wanted. But failure? That word carried weight. It wasn't just about money or cars or clothes. It was about respect. And coming from him, my own flesh and blood, it stung worse than any bill I'd struggled to pay. The week crawled by. I barely spoke to him, not out of anger, but because I didn't trust what might slip out if I opened my mouth. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. He was wrapped up in college acceptance letters, campus tours, all the things that were supposed to be exciting milestones. My wife handled most of it with him. I stayed quiet, working behind the scenes, the same way I always had. See, what he didn't know, what none of his friends knew, was that his future, his chance to stand on his own, had already been quietly secured. I'd been saving for his tuition since before he could walk. Not a glamorous kind of saving, either. It wasn't a trust fund or some big inheritance. It was overtime shifts I volunteered for when I could barely keep my eyes open. It was the fishing boat I sold, the one thing that was purely mine. It was years of brown bag lunches and hand-me-down coats so that money could trickle, bit by bit, into an account with his name on it. I never told him. I wanted him to feel independent, like he'd built his life with his own two hands. I figured one day, when the bills came and the stress hit, he'd find out. Maybe he'd even appreciate it. But after hearing that word, after feeling it carve itself into my chest, I wasn't sure anymore. Friday evening, he came home from school buzzing with excitement. "Dad, I got into state," he said, waving the acceptance letter in my face. His friends must have been hyping him up all day because he was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "That's great, son," I said, keeping my voice even. "We should celebrate." He was already texting his buddies, planning a night out. I watched him from across the kitchen table, the way his fingers flew over his phone, his eyes barely meeting mine. And all I could think was, failure. I nodded, forced a smile, and let him go. My wife gave me a look, the kind that asked 100 questions without saying a word, but I just shook my head again. Not yet, because I knew something he didn't. The tuition bill would be coming soon. And when it did, he'd find out who had been behind him this whole time. And maybe then, just maybe, the word failure wouldn't taste so bitter on my tongue. The tuition bill came on a Wednesday morning, tucked in with a pile of mail that usually only brought grocery flyers and credit card offers. I slid it onto the counter without a word. He was halfway out the door to school, earbuds dangling, when I stopped him. "Mail for you," I said. He grabbed the envelope, tore it open with the casual confidence of someone who's never worried about money. His eyes skimmed down the page, his grin faltering just slightly as the number stared back at him. I saw it, the tightening of his jaw, the quick flicker of panic he tried to mask. Tuition wasn't a joke, not at state, not for out-of-state fees, and especially not when you were already eyeing a new car and a bigger social life. "Oh yeah? That's a lot," he muttered, folding it up. I didn't say anything, just went back to rinsing my coffee mug. For the next 2 days, he walked around the house quieter than usual. No jokes, no late-night laughter on the phone with his friends. I heard him on a call with one of them, his voice low. "I don't know, man. I thought maybe I could get loans, but my credit's nothing. My dad's not really in a position to." He stopped there, but he didn't need to finish. I knew the rest of that sentence. My wife caught me staring out the window later that night, hands shoved deep in my pockets. "You're gonna tell him?" she asked softly. I shook my head. Not yet, because part of me wanted him to sweat. Not out of cruelty, but because maybe then he'd understand. Maybe then he'd realize the weight I'd been carrying for him all these years. On Friday night, he came home late, his shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since he was a little boy who'd lost a baseball game. He sat down at the table across from me, no phone in his hand for once. "Dad," he started, hesitating. "Can I ask you something?" I set down the paper I'd been pretending to read. "Sure." His voice cracked just a little. "Am I gonna be able to do this? College, I mean. I don't want to put Mom through stress, and I know money's been—" He trailed off, ashamed to say it out loud. It was the first time in weeks he'd looked me straight in the eye. The first time his tone carried more humility than bravado. I let the silence stretch. Then I stood, walked over to the drawer by the fridge, and pulled out a folder I'd kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. Inside were years of statements, deposits, the slow but steady climb of a number that once seemed impossible. I slid it across the table to him. He opened it, flipping through the pages. His eyes widened. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. "That's your tuition," I said quietly. "All of it. Paid." He looked up at me, stunned. "What? You've been saving this whole time?" "Since the day you were born," I said. "Every overtime shift. Every extra dollar. Every time I went without, so you wouldn't have to. That's where it went." The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was sharp like glass. He sat back in his chair, the color draining from his face as reality settled in. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Dad, I called you a failure." There it was, out in the open at last. I didn't flinch. "I know." His voice cracked again. "I didn't mean—" "You did," I interrupted, my tone firm but calm. "Maybe not the way you think now, but you did. And that's okay. You're young. You don't see the sacrifices until you need them. But one day, you'll understand that a father's success isn't measured by the truck he drives or the size of his paycheck. It's measured by what he's willing to give up so his son can have more." His eyes glistened, but he blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall in front of me. He closed the folder slowly, his hands trembling as if he were holding something sacred. For the first time in a long while, he didn't look at me like just his dad. He looked at me like a man he was finally starting to understand. The next morning, he was different. Quieter. Thoughtful. He hovered around the kitchen while I made coffee, like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how. Finally, he just blurted it out. "Dad, I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, raw and heavy. I didn't answer right away. I stirred my coffee, took a slow sip, and let him sit with the silence. He shifted uncomfortably, like he was bracing for anger I wasn't about to unleash. "I didn't mean it," he continued, his voice cracking a little. "That day with my friends. I was just trying to sound cool, you know? I thought." He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought if I joked about it, they'd think I had it all figured out. But I didn't. I was wrong." I set my cup down. "You know, son, words matter. Sometimes more than you realize. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but hearing that from you, that one cut deep." He lowered his head. "I know, and I hate that I said it. You've done everything for me, and I didn't even see it." For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who used to run to me after scraping his knee, who thought I could fix anything with duct tape and a hug. But now he was nearly grown, wrestling with the weight of his own words. That weekend, his friends came over again. Normally, I'd keep my distance, but I stayed in the garage, tools in hand, close enough to overhear. I wasn't eavesdropping exactly, more like waiting. And then it happened. One of his buddies asked, half joking, "So, Dude, what did your dad say about the tuition bill? Gonna be drowning in loans with the rest of us? My son didn't laugh this time. He shifted, his voice quieter but firmer than I'd ever heard it. No, my dad, he already paid it. All of it. Been saving since I was born. There was a pause. Then one of them let out a low whistle. Whoa, that's insane. I wish my dad did that. The other shook his head. Man, that's not a failure. That's a hero move. My son glanced toward the garage, and for a split second, our eyes met. His face flushed, but he didn't look away. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and said, Yeah, I know. I didn't get it before, but I get it now. Something inside me eased in that moment. Not pride exactly, more like relief. Relief that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see the truth I'd carried quietly all these years. Later that night, he knocked on my door. Not barging in like usual, but knocking, respectful. Dad, he said softly, I'm proud of you. It was such a simple sentence, but it hit me harder than anything else he could have said. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not as the man with the old truck or the worn-out boots, but as the father who'd done whatever it took. I didn't need a thank you. I didn't need an apology. That one line was enough. And in that moment, I realized something important. Maybe I hadn't failed after all. Maybe, just maybe, I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do.